What is going on, beautiful people? I hope you are having a wonderful day. Today we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of living in Sedalia, Colorado. But hey, if this is your first time to the channel and you are looking to know a little bit more about Denver, some of the surrounding suburbs like Sedalia, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below, hit the bell icon for notifications. That way you can be the first to be notified when I come out with a new video. You can kind of stay up to date on what's going on in the Denver market. My name is Michael and I get people reaching out all the time looking to make a move to Denver or just have questions about the process of getting here and just kind of, where to start. So if that's you, even if it's in a week, 10 weeks, 2 years, whatever it may be, my contact information is below, so feel free to reach out, text, email, phone call, whatever works best for you, and I'd be more than happy to help you in whatever way I can. But without further ado, let's get right into the video. So if you aren't familiar with Sedalia, Colorado, you wouldn't be alone. It's kind of a very small, one-off niche town, just kind of, not necessarily in the middle of nowhere, but just kind of in a weird spot. It's just south of Denver, a little northwest of Castle Rock area, and it's just like this tiny little town with a population of about 200 people. And you might be thinking, why are you even making a video about it? There's only a couple hundred people live there. No one really likes there. You'd be surprised with how many people are actually like, oh, you know what I want to do? I want to pick up and I want to move out to Sedalia. And it kind of spans into the mountains, but there's plenty of options out there, and we'll kind of get into the pros and cons of it. So the first great thing about Sedalia is it's like a little mountain town, kind of near the city. Some of the mountain towns in the mountains have very specific appeal. You go through and it has a very unique experience, and you kind of get something like that in Sedalia, and that's kind of why a lot of people are drawn towards it. You're outside of the city, so you're kind of away from the hustle and bustle, and you're not too far from everything where you have to make like a monthly Costco trip just to kind of stock up on everything because your small grocery store doesn't have everything that you need. So you're close enough to kind of get to things, and if you want to go to events, stuff like that, you're not too far. You're obviously not in a convenient spot for it, but you're not so far taken away from society that it makes it impossible to do things, but you still have that feeling of kind of a small town, mountainy feel. You're surrounded by nature, all that stuff. The next great thing about Sedalia, and a lot of these pros are actually kind of tied into one another, but I kind of break them up because they're their own individual unique benefit to the town. But it's a small town, it has a very rural atmosphere. So if you've ever been to Kansas or kind of East Colorado, where everything's just kind of plains and it's just like a small town, it has a very similar feel. So there's lots of community, everyone kind of knows each other. So if you're trying to stay under wraps, maybe don't go to the bar because everyone's gonna be talking to each other, and your stuff's gonna get out there and everyone's gonna kind of know what's going on. So it's a small town, it's got a very familial feel to it. So if that's something you're looking for, a very small community, might be a good spot to take a look at. So if that's something that you're interested, or maybe you're longing for, you want to get to Colorado, but you don't necessarily want the city life, you also don't want to be so far away from everything, good option right there for you. Another great thing about Sedalia is you're right along the range. So if you're looking to go hiking, biking, a lot of that outdoor activity stuff throughout the year, whether it's in the winter, summer, you're right next to the mountains. So you're not having a far drive, and you're really not gonna have any traffic whatsoever in that part. If you are kind of going up north, you might run into some of the I-70 traffic, but for the most part, you're not gonna have to deal with a lot of that stuff because you're pretty much already in the mountains. It's basically your backyard, and I can imagine it's really nice to just kind of wake up, go a couple miles, and just get into the forest right away. It's gotta be a nice feeling. So this next one might not necessarily be considered a pro to some people, very much so. And it's just your exposure to wildlife. Because you're so far out of the city and there's not a lot of construction going on, a lot of the animals still kind of live in that area. So you're gonna see a lot of deer. I've seen plenty of elk through there. A lot of your smaller animals too. But you're gonna see a lot of that wildlife day to day, probably every single day. So don't be surprised if you wake up, you're making your coffee, and you see a bunch of deer in your front yard, just eating your grass, eating your tomato plants, whatever you have. Probably not the best place for a garden unless you have, nice big fence around it. But that's just something you're gonna see, and a lot of people like having those animals around. Some people, not so much. They're not huge fans of having those big animals up so close. So I guess if you're not a huge fan of the wildlife, you'd rather see them in pictures or magazines, maybe Sedalia might not be for you. Now this last one's very unique to Sedalia itself and just the area, because you don't see it a whole lot throughout the rest of the Denver area. But because there's not a whole lot of ambient light there, you're gonna be able to see the sky really clear at night. Unless there's clouds out, you're gonna see all the stars, whereas if you're in Denver, it's kind of hit or miss. It's not gonna be as common of a thing, being able to see as many stars as you can. Now again, maybe that's not for you. Maybe you're just like, I don't care about that whatsoever. But some people might think that's kind of cool, and you have that, you know, very rural feel to it. I think it's pretty cool, and I would love to have that where I live, but it's just not a thing where I'm at. You know, we do get the occasional clear night, but for the most part, it's a little spotty, and you're not gonna see as many stars as you would down south in Sedalia. And just being out there, I mean, no ambient light, way less pollution, fresher air. It's just all around a little bit more outdoorsy, and just have that natural Colorado feel that a lot of people kind of think of when they are thinking about Colorado. All right, now let's get into the cons. Now this one surprises a lot of people because you wouldn't necessarily think this, but it is very expensive to live in Sedalia. The median single family home is about $1.05 million. So it's pretty pricey. You know, it's not necessarily as pricey as some of the other suburbs within Denver, but it's up there, and it surpasses quite a few places around there. Now I will say there are some pretty amazing houses down there. If you ever have a second, just go on Zillow real quick, look up Sedalia, and just look at some of the houses that have sold there. Probably won't really find many things on the market when you look, just because, you know, there's only a couple hundred people living there, so there's not that many homes. But there are some really, really nice, expensive homes out there, and it's just really cool to see because it's its own little mansion out in the middle of nowhere, it seems like. But if you're looking for a small rural town that was affordable, you might have to look a little bit east of Denver, or maybe northeast, just kind of in the plains of Colorado, not necessarily right on the Front Range. Now the next thing, and the next few things, are actually kind of all similar, but it's kind of its own separate item. But within Sedalia itself, there's very limited amenities. There's a few places to eat, a few places to shop, but you know, for a town of 200 people, it doesn't make sense to have those businesses there. So they just aren't there. You know, you have your local spot, but that's about it. So if you're looking for food or to go shopping, you're gonna probably have to go to Castle Rock, probably the closest spot to you, or you might have to go up north to Littleton. Just kind of depends on your preferences and what you need. And that goes for public services too. So, you know, your healthcare, all that stuff, rec center, stuff like that. Not gonna have that in Sedalia. You're gonna have to go out there and get to the shelf. You're gonna have to go out and find something a little bit farther out. Now the next thing is you're just far from everything. So, you know, if you were planning on maybe commuting to Denver from Sedalia, I highly recommend you come out here and make that drive a few times just to actually feel how long it is, because, you know, you can look on a map and it says, oh, you know, 42 minutes. But you get out here and you do that a couple times, and 42 minutes all of a sudden becomes 42 minutes. And it feels a lot different when you're actually doing it yourself rather than just seeing it on a map. Plus, if you have a little traffic here and there, it's not gonna be fun to kind of get stuck in. And that also goes for if you're planning on going to a lot of sporting events, or you just plan on going and doing a lot of things with friends in Denver. You know, it's quite a ways out there. The idea of living kind of away from things sounds nice until you're having to drive 4 or 5 times a week into Denver, and that takes up 10, 12 hours of your week right there. So I will say, if you're interested and you're a remote worker and maybe you kind of work virtually, it might not be a bad spot for you, just because the only time you'd have to go into town is just kind of buy your groceries, or if you're meeting up with friends or doing an event, but it's not going to be as much as commuting for a job. And the last thing is there's just not a whole lot of entertainment in town. You know, I said there's just a few places to eat, so your entertainment is really limited to the community. And you know, they might do a couple things, they might have a couple community events, but for the most part, you're not gonna have a whole lot of places to go and things to do in town as far as entertainment goes. So I guess if you're somebody who likes to stay at home, very introverted, watches TV, maybe binge watches some Netflix shows, maybe it might not be too bad for you, but it's just something to consider that, you know, if it's the winter months and you're stuck inside for 3 weeks, apart from just going to groceries, you might get a little bored over that time. So Sedalia isn't perfect, and there are definitely things that, you know, are huge drawbacks. But again, at the same time, it's a very niche area. So if you're looking for something very specific and that checks all your boxes, and the negatives don't necessarily hurt you, or you don't really care about those things, then I say just go check it out. Definitely make that drive a few times, make sure you're comfortable with that drive. But it's always a good thing to consider, and just kind of keeping your list of possibilities if you think it's something that you might be interested in. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and hopefully it answered some questions you might have about Sedalia. Oh, and don't forget, if you are planning on moving here, or just a little curious, maybe need a little bit of help, or just have some questions about Denver, or just some something around Denver, feel free to contact me. My information is below. But until next time, I will see you guys later.